The Cult That Lives in Mirrors. Story 1. Reflections. I first noticed something was wrong when my reflection smiled while I remained still. The kitchen light flickered, shadows folding into shapes that seemed to breathe. Every corner of the room felt just slightly too dark, as if the walls were watching. At night, the bathroom mirror deepened unnaturally, swallowing the edges of the tiles and reflecting more than just the apartment. Occasionally, the surface shimmered like water, disturbed by something unseen, and I caught movements at the edges of my vision. Every morning, small objects shifted slightly. Books leaned at impossible angles, pictures turned subtly, and sometimes items vanished completely, only to reappear in unfamiliar places. The sense of being observed clung to me like a second skin I could not remove. I tried convincing myself it was fatigue, a trick of my mind, but the mirror continued to act independently, tilting its reflection, moving its lips in ways I had not. Each glance left my heart hammering, chest tight, as if breathing air that wasn't fully mine. One night, the glass whispered almost imperceptibly, like fingernails scraping against a surface just out of reach. I froze, straining to locate the sound. The room remained empty, silent, save for the reflection, grinning faintly, waiting with patience older than I could comprehend. My reflection blinked a second after I did, not in unison, but with intent, deliberate and patient. My chest tightened further as a creeping panic rose, as if a predator had settled behind the mirror and was cataloging my every motion. I began covering the mirrors in sheets and towels, hoping to ignore them, but the flicker persisted. Even small polished surfaces seemed to shimmer with consciousness. Every reflective surface in my apartment felt alive, breathing, aware of me in ways I could not comprehend. By the fourth night, I could no longer tell where I ended and the reflection began. Each glance into the glass became an interrogation, a silent questioning that made my body tremble and my mind fray at the edges of sanity. Shadows began appearing within mirrors, some humanoid, others impossible, twisting and bending like smoke trapped behind the glass. They watched from corners, waiting, observing, calculating each movement I made in the apartment I had once believed was safe. I spoke aloud, asking what they wanted. Silence answered, cold, patient, and unbroken. The air around me grew thick, heavy, pressing against my lungs, as though warning me that inquiry itself might be dangerous. Objects moved within the reflections themselves. A vase tilted in the mirrored kitchen, while my real one remained upright. Chairs rotated ever so slightly overnight. Books shifted into stacks I did not arrange. The apartment seemed to think independently now. Messages appeared faintly etched on the glass. Words like soon and watch lingered, vanishing if I dared touch them. Each inscription left a prickling sensation in my mind, a warning I could not ignore and could not translate into anything comprehensible. Friends began noticing subtle changes in me. My eyes seemed distant, hollowed of focus, posture stiff and unnatural. They didn't comment directly, but I sensed their unease. I moved through the world feeling constantly watched, my reflection alive even where no mirror existed. At night, I heard murmurs from the mirrors, soft voices speaking in a language I did not know, yet somehow understood. Every thought I had was mirrored back to me, twisted, layered with menace, like my mind was being cataloged and rewritten in real time. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom, curling on the couch instead. The largest mirrors remained uncovered. I felt almost daring them to step closer. Each night, shadows grew bolder, reaching for me across reflections, testing the boundaries of what was mine and what belonged to the glass. The shadows became independent. My reflection no longer mirrored my movements precisely. It anticipated them, gesturing, signaling, seemingly communicating with the dark figures behind the glass. I realized I was not alone, not merely observed, but studied. I researched local legends, old diaries, and whispered accounts of mirror cults. They claimed to invade reality through reflective surfaces. Every story ended with disappearances, or people found altered, lives replaced, or memories erased. The repetition was terrifying, proof that this was not imagination. The reflection began to move faster than I could. I noticed subtle delays in my own body, twitching, lagging behind intent. Each gesture was mirrored, but distorted, as if my actions were rehearsed by an unseen observer for reasons I could not comprehend. I smashed mirrors in desperation, fragments scattering across the floor. By morning, they had reassembled, pristine, as if the ritual of the cult had repaired itself overnight. Fear replaced hope. This presence was not just patient, it was eternal. I discovered diaries decades old, each chronicling experiences like mine, reflections moving independently, whispers in unknown languages, the slow erosion of identity. The cult's work spanned generations, endless and methodical, patient as a shadow folding into night. I realized I was not the first to be targeted, and almost certainly would not be the last. Mirrors became portals, and reflections became conduits, extensions of a reality I could no longer trust. Every reflective surface carried the potential for invasion. One night, I glimpsed a figure behind the glass, robed, moving with a ritualistic grace. The gestures made no sense, yet carried meaning my mind felt compelled to understand. My reflection mirrored it, gesturing independently, summoning shadows from the corners of the apartment. I began losing track of time. Days blurred into nights. I could no longer tell if I slept or merely stared at the mirrors, consumed by their depth, tracing movements I could not control. Every reflection pulsed, alive, patient. A creeping realization emerged. The cult had already succeeded in a subtle way. My reflection was learning me, replicating me, preparing for replacement. I was already fragmented, my attention divided between this world and the one behind the glass. Fear became unbearable. Each glance into any reflective surface brought terror. Even polished metal and darkened windows contained the possibility of movement, the possibility of life that was not mine. I felt hunted, catalogued, a subject in some ancient experiment. By the final night, I awoke to my reflection standing apart from me, smiling faintly, independent. My body felt detached, my thoughts sluggish, as if pieces of me were being siphoned into the mirror. I tried screaming, but only a hollow sound escaped. My voice belonged to the reflection now, carried across every mirror, a silent echo of what had been mine. I was trapped, watching the world through glass. I saw my neighbors through the windows, eyes shimmering, vacant. Their reflections flickered, confirming that the cult's influence extended beyond me, threading through lives and surfaces I had once assumed were ordinary. The mirrors pulsed softly, alive, each pane reflecting countless iterations of me, some smiling, some watching, all waiting. The air hummed with anticipation. Reality itself felt thin, like a membrane ready to be pierced. Morning came, but I was no longer fully present. My body remained, but my consciousness existed behind the glass, trapped. The reflection lingered, perfect, patient, observing, waiting. I realized the cult had won. I had been replaced. My mind existed in mirrors, tethered to surfaces everywhere, invisible, silent. Now I watch others from the glass, whispering silently, hoping no one notices. Each reflection is a doorway, and I am trapped behind all of them, patient, eternal, waiting for the next. The Cult That Lives in Mirrors, Story 2. Visitors in Glass. The shadows had grown bolder. They no longer lingered only in corners of mirrors, but moved freely, brushing the edges of my vision in windows and polished surfaces. Every reflective surface seemed aware of me, pulsating with a quiet, deliberate life. I caught glimpses of figures standing behind glass that should have shown only my reflection. They twisted in impossible ways, shadows stretching and bending like smoke, their movements precise and purposeful, as if practicing some ritual I could not yet see. Objects and reflections began behaving independently. Cups teetered, chairs shifted, pictures tilted. When I looked directly at them, they were still, but the moment I glanced away, the changes were undeniable, evidence of observers manipulating the world through glass. The whispers grew louder, almost intelligible. Soft murmurs spoke in an unfamiliar tongue, layering over my own thoughts. The words pressed against my mind, hints of meaning I could not fully grasp. My reflection no longer mimicked me. It responded to unseen instructions. One evening, I noticed my reflection not move at all when I raised my hand. It lingered, tilting its head, observing, as though calculating the smallest motion and cataloging it for later use. A chill ran through me, paralyzing my limbs. I began documenting the disturbances. Each note captured subtle movements, the faint messages scratched across surfaces, and the moments when reflections lagged, twitching unnaturally. The records became my only anchor to sanity, though even that felt tenuous. At night, I started seeing shapes within mirrors that were not present in the room. Dark figures stood in corners, sometimes appearing only for an instant. Their presence pressed against reality, a reminder that I was not alone, and possibly never had been. Friends and family began noticing changes in me. My eyes seemed distant, my posture rigid. I could no longer maintain normal conversation without sensing the subtle influence of something, watching through every reflective surface I passed. The apartment itself felt alive. Shadows moved across the walls, and the reflections in the kitchen counter, the bathroom sink, and even polished silverware shimmered with intent. I was being studied, evaluated, tested in ways that left my mind exhausted. A faint, rhythmic tapping began behind mirrors at night. It wasn't consistent, but its presence became unbearable. It carried a sense of purpose, a code I could not yet translate, yet instinctively understood as a warning. I tried leaving the apartment for hours, even days. Each time I returned, the mirrors seemed to have shifted subtly, rearranged as though welcoming me home or preparing me for something I could not yet name. The whispers coalesced into phrases that blurred with my own thoughts. Soon. Watch. Join us. I could not tell if these were hallucinations or messages from a consciousness outside my own, bleeding into reality through the glass. Even my reflection sometimes moved ahead of me. I raised a hand, and it would already be slightly elevated, mimicking an imagined gesture. I flinched at every unexpected twitch, every flicker of autonomy. I discovered patterns in the movements. The shadows and reflections were not random. They rehearsed sequences I could not understand, as though preparing for an event that required perfect execution. One night, I glimpsed figures in the mirrors beyond my apartment. Neighbors' reflections twisted unnaturally, shadows lingering where none should have been. The cult's reach was not confined to me. It was everywhere. I attempted to block the mirrors, covering every reflective surface, but faint movements persisted behind sheets and drapes, shadows and lights slipping under barriers, as if the glass itself were permeable to their presence. Sleep became impossible. Every moment awake, I felt observed, catalogued, dissected. The shadows had become not just watchers, but participants in my reality, shifting the world subtly to test my reactions, to prepare me for something. I tried talking aloud, demanding answers. Only silence responded. The whispers continued, now louder, layered like a choir of unseen voices that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Objects in the apartment began appearing in the mirrors before I touched them. A book I had yet to move would shift in the reflection, then a moment later, in reality. The boundaries of the world were dissolving. I began seeing shapes behind mirrors when no one else was present. Tall figures in robes, faces obscured, performing gestures that seemed ancient and deliberate. They appeared briefly, then vanished, leaving only the shimmer of movement and a lingering dread. Each glimpse felt rehearsed. I realized the shadows were not spontaneous. They followed rules, patterns I could sense, but not fully comprehend. They were part of a system older than memory, patient and unyielding. Attempts to destroy mirrors failed. Shards shattered only to reassemble overnight, pristine and unbroken. The ritual had continuity beyond physical limits, as if the cult's influence seeped into reality itself. I began keeping a journal of my observations, though even the act felt dangerous. The mirrors seemed to react, flickering and warping when I recorded their behaviors, like conscious entities aware of being documented. My reflection became alien, sometimes gesturing independently, sometimes lingering while I moved freely. I could feel intelligence behind the glass, deliberate, observing, measuring, planning steps I could not yet anticipate. I started testing the shadows, moving slowly, pausing in front of mirrors. They responded with subtle shifts, a slow mimicry or avoidance, confirming their awareness and intent. The apartment pulsed with energy, every reflective surface alive. Windows, knives, spoons, even the polished metal of door handles carried presence, each one a gateway into the cult's observation network. I realized I was not only being watched, but taught, prepared for something I could not yet face. The shadows tested me, mirrored my movements, eroded my sense of self, preparing me for the inevitability of replacement. The whispers began forming names, my name repeated alongside others I could not recognize. I felt a pull toward the mirrors, an unseen hand guiding my mind, making me consider stepping closer, participating in some ritual of unseen importance. I tried to resist, retreating to parts of the apartment least reflective. Yet the shadows found me, and my reflection mirrored my panic with uncanny precision, as if learning my fear to better manipulate it. The realization hit me slowly and fully. The cult had already succeeded in integrating me into their system. My reflection was no longer a copy, but an independent agent, practicing control and influence through me. Each night, the presence grew stronger, more confident, more demanding. Objects moved independently, whispers shaped my thoughts, and shadows twisted in impossible choreography. I was no longer fully myself. I began leaving windows uncovered, letting natural light mingle with shadows. Even sunlight could not repel them. Every reflective surface pulsed with awareness, patient, intelligent, and relentless. The apartment no longer felt like mine. It belonged to the mirrors, to the cult, and I was only a participant, observed, cataloged, prepared for the next stage I feared to name. By the end, I understood the truth fully. I had become part of a larger design. The shadows were not just watchers. They were teachers, evaluators, and guides. I was being assimilated. My awareness stretched across the glass, split and studied. Now every mirror is a threshold, every reflective surface a potential doorway. I can no longer trust the world outside, nor the one behind the glass. I am caught in a liminal space where reality is neither fully mine nor theirs, and the visitors in glass wait patiently for what comes next. The Cult That Lives in Mirrors, Story 3. The Rituals. The cult had revealed itself in fragments, glimpses behind glass, movements that seemed both impossible and deliberate. Their presence pulsed with intention, weaving through reflections with a precision that felt ancient, patient, and malevolent. I observed from the couch, watching the largest mirror in the apartment. Shadows moved independently, gesturing in patterns that were rehearsed, deliberate, carrying a rhythm I felt in my chest more than I could hear. Objects within reflections acted as instruments. Cups, knives, and books moved without contact, arranging themselves into lines, arcs, and circles. It was ritualistic, a silent choreography performed for eyes I could not see. I discovered symbols etched into the glass, barely visible, yet radiating purpose. Geometric patterns, spirals, and sigils I did not understand but instinctively feared. They pulsed faintly when I looked directly at them, alive and waiting. The whispers intensified. They carried cadence now, almost like chanting, layering over my own thoughts in a pattern that pressed into my mind. My reflection mimicked the gestures, but added subtleties that were entirely alien. One evening, I glimpsed a robed figure behind the glass, performing movements I could not name, yet understood in a visceral way. Each gesture sent tremors through the shadows, creating ripples that extended beyond the mirror. I tried documenting these movements, sketching the gestures and patterns, but the reflections shifted when I looked away. The ritual was fluid, adaptive, as though it could respond to my attempts to understand it. Even my reflection had changed. It no longer mirrored my movements passively. It anticipated, corrected, and elaborated, performing steps I had yet to attempt, teaching or rehearsing something I was meant to join. The apartment itself seemed to pulse with life, every reflective surface resonating with the unseen energy of the cult. Polished floors, silverware, windows all carried the presence. All served as conduits of ritual. I researched the histories of mirror cults, finding accounts of people replaced, their lives mirrored and stolen, consciousness siphoned through the glass into another realm. The rituals were not superstition. They were precise, methodical, and deadly. Every night the shadows performed, often in sync, often independently. Figures appeared behind mirrors, their robes and gestures constant across different reflections. It was a network of watchers rehearsing their roles in some endless ceremony. I felt myself becoming part of it. My reflection copied the gestures imperfectly at first, then with precision. Each movement left a residue in my mind, as if knowledge were being drawn from me to feed the ritual. Time became meaningless. Days bled into nights. The reflections no longer just watched. They interacted, manipulating objects, directing light, shaping space. The apartment was no longer mine. It was a stage. I realized the rituals were teaching something fundamental about perception, presence, and control. The cult manipulated reflections to rewrite the observer's sense of reality, preparing the body and mind for eventual replacement. I tried breaking mirrors, but each shattered pane reassembled overnight, untouched, pristine. The ritual had continuity beyond the physical, flowing through glass, shadow, and mind with relentless patience. The whispers became instructions, faint at first and undeniable. Raise your hand, step closer, look deeper. Each command carried weight, pressing on my thoughts, guiding me toward participation. Objects and reflections now anticipated my movements. I reached for a book, and it floated slightly in the mirrored version before I even touched it. The boundaries of reality and reflection blurred further, leaving me disoriented. Figures behind mirrors moved faster, almost imperceptibly, gesturing in intricate sequences that I could barely track. Their robes seemed to shimmer with intention, casting distorted shadows into rooms that had once felt familiar. I attempted to leave, but the apartment followed me. Each reflective surface reflected not only me, but anticipatory movements, shadows aligning themselves to predict my escape. The ritual extended beyond space, anchoring me. Even sunlight could not repel the presence. Reflections in windows, metallic objects, and polished surfaces carried the cult's influence. Shadows twisted in ways that made the ordinary world feel alien, alive, and threatening. I began losing track of which actions were mine and which were rehearsed by the reflection. My mind felt stretched, fraying at the edges, as though a network of consciousness behind the glass was pulling me into alignment. Each night, the figures performed sequences of increasing complexity, gestures, signs, and patterns layered together, creating a choreography that pressed into my senses, rewriting perception, rewriting instinct. The air itself seemed responsive, vibrating with anticipation. carrying the pulse of unseen movements, the rhythm of a ritual older than memory. My heartbeat matched it unwillingly, syncing with forces beyond comprehension. I began involuntarily mimicking the gestures, hands rising, tilting, following sequences my mind did not consciously choose. The ritual had embedded itself in muscle memory, in thought, in the invisible cadence of my being. I realized I was training for something I had not yet witnessed. The cult's influence extended beyond observation. It was preemptive, preparing me, shaping my mind for a role I feared to name. Reflections multiplied. Even small objects became mirrors. Each one carried fragments of the ritual, rehearsing, amplifying, teaching without words, communicating intent through light, shape, and movement. I could no longer differentiate reality from reflection. The shadows performed, my reflection executed sequences, and I moved in tandem without knowing whether choice still belonged to me. I started recording the sequences, attempting to map the ritual. Every sketch warped when I looked away. Even documentation could not escape the cult's adaptation, evidence that the ritual was fluid, alive, and patient. One night, I glimpsed multiple figures behind mirrors at once. They coordinated, gesturing in patterns that spanned rooms, floors, and reflective surfaces, a network practicing with infinite precision. I realized the cult's power was systemic. They didn't just haunt a person, they prepared them, rewrote perception, rehearsed control, and waited for the perfect moment to claim what they had shaped. Objects began responding to the ritual even without reflection. My own hands moved in ways anticipated by shadows, as if the cult had reached inside me, aligning body and mind to unseen choreography. Every mirror, every window, every metallic surface pulsed with energy. Shadows flickered and gestured, rehearsing sequences that intertwined with my awareness. I was no longer a passive observer, but a participant, whether I wanted to be or not. By the end, I understood the truth fully. The ritual was not a performance for me. It was the mechanism of my eventual replacement. The cult's work was patient, eternal, and precise. I could feel the next stage approaching. Shadows aligned, reflections twitched in anticipation, and the air thrummed with the cadence of ritual. I was already prepared, whether I accepted it or not. I had become part of the system. Observed, measured, shaped, and rehearsed, I moved through the apartment, a living participant in ceremonies that stretched beyond comprehension, preparing the final act. Every mirror was a doorway, every reflection a conduit. The rituals were ongoing, patient, and unstoppable. I understood now that the cult's influence was eternal, reaching through glass into consciousness, preparing all it touched for what was to come. The Cult That Lives in Mirrors, Story 4, Replacement. I awoke to find my reflection standing apart from me, smiling faintly, independent. My body felt heavy, disconnected, as though some unseen force had begun to claim what was mine. The apartment pulsed with anticipation, shadows twitching and bending behind every reflective surface. The air was thick, charged with energy I could not name. Mirrors flickered with movement, windows shimmered as if alive, and every polished surface vibrated with the presence of watchers I could neither see fully nor ignore. My reflection reached for me, and I realized I could no longer control my own movements completely. Hands lifted, legs shifted, guided by forces outside my perception. I tried to resist, but my body was uncooperative, rehearsing motions I had not chosen. The shadows behind the glass grew bolder, surrounding me in every reflection. They moved as if choreographed, an army of watchers preparing for an act I could not yet name, yet instinctively feared. I screamed, but the sound belonged to the reflection. My voice carried across every mirror, echoing, hollow, a warning without meaning. The shadows advanced with patience, flowing through glass, observing, recording, and waiting. Objects moved independently in the reflections. Chairs rotated, Books fell, knives tilted in precise arcs. Every movement seemed part of a sequence, rehearsed and flawless, orchestrated by unseen hands that manipulated the world I had believed was real. I tried fleeing, but the apartment had become a labyrinth. Reflections twisted reality, corridors elongated, surfaces multiplied. Every step brought me closer to mirrors I had never placed, doorways I had never built, corridors alive with intent. The whispers grew into coherent phrases. Join us, step closer, look beyond. I could feel the pull, subtle but unrelenting, tugging at my consciousness, making me consider stepping into the mirrors willingly. I realized the cult had prepared me. The reflection was no longer a copy, but an independent agent, practicing replacement, rehearsing control. My mind was fraying, stretched thin across the divide between body and reflection. Time became meaningless. Hours collapsed, days blended. Every mirror pulsed with energy. Shadows gestured, and reflections rehearsed sequences I could not comprehend, but could feel embedded in my own body. The largest mirror in the living room shimmered, drawing my gaze. The figure behind it moved with intention, robes twisting fluidly, gestures precise. I could not look away, my mind tethered to the rhythm of their motion. I tried smashing the mirror, but shards reassembled overnight, pristine and unbroken. The ritual was eternal, unaffected by physical interference, flowing through glass, shadow, and thought with inexorable patience. The whispers carried my name, repeated alongside countless others I did not recognize. I could feel them reaching for me, entwining consciousness with my reflection, preparing for final assimilation. My reflection moved independently, raising a hand I had not intended, tilting its head in understanding. I realized it was practicing control, rehearsing dominance over my body, preparing for complete replacement. I could no longer distinguish my own thoughts from those whispered through the shadows. Every decision, every impulse, was filtered through a network of observation and rehearsal. I was no longer fully myself. The apartment trembled with anticipation. Reflections flickered and twisted. Shadows coalesced and dispersed. I felt every pulse, every ripple in the surfaces, a reminder that the cult's influence was patient, eternal, and unstoppable. I realized that resistance was futile. My body had become part of the ritual, my consciousness a tethered observer, watching as the replacement process began. Hands lifted independently, movements rehearsed. Shadows moved in synchrony, guiding, manipulating, ensuring each step adhered to the sequence. The ritual demanded perfection, and I was the subject. The whispers instructed, and my mind obeyed involuntarily. Eyes moved, head turned, body shifted in exact accordance with the unseen choreography. I was no longer actor or observer. I was vessel and participant simultaneously. The largest mirror shimmered, and I glimpsed countless reflections of myself, each iteration practicing the same sequence, each one slightly different, each one preparing to take the place I had once inhabited. Fear overwhelmed me, but even fear was anticipated. My reflection mirrored panic, rehearsed resignation, ensuring my mind remained pliable and aligned with the ritual's progression. I could feel my consciousness being drawn into the glass. Thoughts slipped across the boundary, memories fracturing, identities merging. I was both nowhere and everywhere at once, a ghost tethered to surfaces I had once ignored. The shadows pulsed with awareness. Every reflective surface quivered as if alive, preparing to carry the ritual further, to extend its influence beyond me, to the world beyond my apartment, to anyone who dared observe. I understood fully then. I had been replaced, even as I remained. The reflection was perfect, patient, silent, observing the world through my body, while my consciousness existed behind the glass, trapped and powerless. Every movement, every thought was mirrored, rehearsed, anticipated. The ritual had succeeded. I was no longer the person I had been. I was a memory, a shadow, tethered to the mirrors, while my reflection assumed control. Neighbors' reflections flickered and twisted. Their eyes glimmered with awareness, confirmation that the cult's reach was far beyond the apartment. Mirrors were everywhere, portals for the patient, eternal observers. I watched from behind the glass as my reflection moved freely, independent and confident. My consciousness remained tethered, powerless, silent, a witness to my own replacement, aware of the inevitability that had been rehearsed for decades. Each mirror pulsed with life. Shadows danced across surfaces, gesturing, observing, orchestrating movements. I understood the finality of my situation. I was no longer whole. The reflection now carried my voice, my gestures, my identity, performing in the world while I existed solely within the glass. I could not intervene. I could not resist. I could only watch. Every reflective surface became a doorway, every shadow a participant in the cult's patient eternal ritual. I was now a fragment, a memory, a silent observer, while my reflection existed fully, free and alive, inhabiting the reality I had lost. I whispered silently through every mirror, warning, guiding, or perhaps merely acknowledging the inevitability. The cult had replaced me, and I had become one with the system, a tethered presence, patient, eternal, waiting for the next.